First of all, to let you know exactly where we are. Well, the regulation became law in May this year. It's not in force until 2018. So I've put up on here the latest on the sort of Brexit timetable as well here. So you understand from Theresa May's speech last Sunday that she's going to table the formal Article 50 notice to leave the EU by the 31st of March 2016. Now, that means that by the 31st of March 2018, the UK will have left the EU. So whether you like it or not, the General Data Protection Regulation is going to come into force in the UK. So there will be at least 9 months, when we're still in the EU, when we will have to comply with it. Now, by 2018, the Great Reform Bill will come into force. Now, what that does is it'll transfer all European legislation, including the General Data Protection Regulation, will then just come into UK domestic law. The UK government will then have the point to actually say which bits it wants to keep and which bits it wants to change. The one issue that's still on the table, the big known unknown, is we don't know what kind of UK-EU trade deal we're going to get. But Brexit is not going to change anything. As I've said, there'll be a free trade agreement. At minimum, we will want to have, adequacy standards with the EU because of all the data flows that are coming across that are coming across to Europe. But it's also now a global issue as well. Data protections, global issue. People are transferring data, freely across the world on a 24/7 basis. And as I've said there, that the data protection, and the current Data Protection Act is going to remain in force. And however way they implement the General Data Protection Regulation, that's coming into force. One of the things that is still on the table is there could be a GDPR light issue for people who are just exclusively operating in the UK to UK customers only. But as soon as you're going across to Europe and you're having French customers visiting your website from France who are resident in France, then you will have to comply with the full version of the GDPR. So, accountability. This is one of the key new principles in the regulation. This means that you're going to actually have to demonstrate to regulators how you are complying with the regulation. So you will need to document the decisions that you're going to take about your processing activities, and you will need to make sure that your internal policies and procedures, are up to speed and are up to the standards of the GDPR. That's a slightly different way of. So in other words, what I'm saying is that the regulator could actually come and ask you, you haven't, breached anything, you haven't done anything wrong, but the regulator, Information Commission can come on and ask you and saying, how are you compliant? One of the, and by the way, like the previous speaker, you will make your slides available through Lara afterwards. What we're very pleased about in the regulation is that direct marketing is being explicitly recognised as a legitimate interest in the regulation. So that means that they recognise that it's in the interests of business to actually be able to send out marketing material to their customers. So for those of you who are operating by mail, it will end up exactly the same thing as it is now. You will have to offer them the opportunity to unsubscribe, and that will satisfy the balancing test. Just a small point about the regulation. If any of you using processing, personal information about children that you may well have as clients through your parents, you won't be able to use this legitimate interest ground as a ground for processing the information about the children. However, what you are going to have to make sure that your privacy notices and your privacy policies are much more clear and transparent. You're going to have to tell them about what the first and third party direct marketing customers and registered prospects are going to receive. And I say the opt-out and the unsubscribe has to be clear and easy to use. So sort of no more burying it in your privacy policy or anything else like that. It will have to be upfront on the website. And some of you may well decide that you may want to go down a route of having a preference center by your brand or by channel. Again, that's fine. But if you've got a multiple number of brands and everything else like that, just remember the complication that you might have of actually having getting your consumers to have a degree in filling out unsubscribe forms before they even get anywhere. So my strong advice to you is think about it, but make sure you keep it simple. Moving on to the other legal ground that there is for processing data in the regulation. Now, this is the consent one. Now, this is the one that you may well be using if you use a subscribe or an opt-in system. But some of you may be using on them there. On the left-hand side is what the law currently is, and on the right-hand side is what this new consent ground is under the new legislation. Again, we were very pleased that through our lobbying efforts, we didn't get the word explicit was in there. I think those of you who may well have heard me come along when I last spoke to you about 18 months ago, I was doubtful as to whether it would end up as being explicit or unambiguous. Yet I'm very pleased to say that it ended up as unambiguous. So what you've got to do is it has to be given by a statement and a clear affirmative action. And as you say, from the accountability principle, the burden of proof is on you to actually demonstrate that you've got consent. So the main point I want to draw out from this slide is that you can't use pre-ticked boxes as a way of getting consent for doing it. I said, it has to be a positive indication of the consumer's wishes. So silence or inactivity doesn't wash. Another one of the big changes in the regulation is the amount of information that you're going to have to provide to consumers. One of the problems you've probably seen from all the stats around there is that consumers have very little trust in organisations with the way they handle their data, and that was one of the drivers for the regulation. So you are going to have to give much more information. So you're going to have to give your name and contact details, whether it's going to be used for direct marketing purposes, the third parties to which the information is going to be passed on. Now, we're very much waiting for guidance from the Information Commissioner's Office as to how specific you're going to be, as to whether just talking about people, as a sort of group here would be sufficient. So you'd have to say, we're going to pass your details on to, people who are in the members of the Epsilon Abacus pool, and then you might have to have a click through to link to the website so they can see which companies are of them there. You're also going to have to give people the length of time for which you're going to keep the information. If you can't actually specify the length of time, you're going to have to say, as a sort of general idea, for as long as you remain a customer of ours. You're going to have to also list all the data subjects' rights there to them as well, and provide them with information about profiling. Now that's about sort of 21 different pieces of information that you're going to have to put them down there. Now, what we're very pleased about is the ICO have confirmed that that repermissioning exercises that if you make sure that your standards now are going to be up to speed with the regulation, then you won't have to go back and get everybody's repermissioning, which is brilliant for us, because otherwise when we wake up on the 26th of May, our inbox will be full of repermissioning statements from all the clients that we're actually customers of ourselves. And we're very pleased that if you're using the legitimate interest and you're just using the unsubscribe wording, the opt-out wording, that as long as you make sure now that that's up to speed with the requirements when the regulation comes in, again, you won't have to go through a large repermissioning exercise. So you'll be glad to hear that what that means is that the existing rules for post and telephone marketing, for first and third party marketing, if using it, are going to remain the same as they are. If you're using email and SMS marketing, the General Data Protection Regulation does not amend the Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations, that has the separate rules for email and SMS marketing on it. But what you will have to do is you will have to make sure that your information requirements are up to speed. And just to say that, you remember, if you're outsourcing processing to a bureau, that the bureau isn't a third party. Looking about the new rules on profiling, there are two rights here. Individuals have the right to, unsubscribe from a decision based on profiling which produces legal effects concerning the individual or similarly significantly affects the individual. Our hope is that sending somebody a piece of direct marketing isn't going to be considered as, a legal effect or substantially significantly affecting the individual. So the only one you're going to have to worry about now is, that the right to opt out from the direct marketing. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to tell them that you are going to, that you're effectively using profiling for your direct marketing things, and offer them the unsubscribe and the opt out from direct marketing. Now, some other major changes that I'm going to that are coming in, that I'm just going to talk briefly about, are, first of all, the data security breach notification requirements. Now, that hit the news yesterday with the TalkTalk fine of £400,000. What's going to come in the regulation is that you are going to have to notify within 72 hours of a data breach and everything else like that. That's going to be a very if some people, that's going to be a very difficult and a tall order. The other thing that you may well have heard about quite a lot of is the actual right to erasure. And this is the fact that somebody is going to be able to write into you and say, I want you to erase, all the information that you've got about me. What our view is that in some cases that's not actually the way to go forward, because obviously if you delete if you delete that person's information from them and don't keep it on your suppression file, there's a risk that you're going to do the very thing that the consumer doesn't want you to do in future. You buy their name and address in from another organisation, and you send them the piece of direct marketing. So just remember about that hopefully it's going to be clarified in the guidance notes that won't actually, someone asks for their details to be deleted, what you're going to be doing is you're going to erase their details from your main marketing database file, but actually just keep it on the suppression file. The fines are going to be massively increased under the regulation. If you're having trouble getting the attention of your senior management, if you're in a large organisation, onto this one, that's a very good way to get their attention of them there. The fines have been, fixed at, 10 million euros or 2% of global turnover for small fines, and the top fine is going to be 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover. So, in summary, the General Data Protection Regulation, is an evolution, not, a revolution. If you're currently complying with the current data protection law, then you'll be well placed. You'll be well placed to do it with the regulation when it comes into force. That's not going to say, sometimes internally, as I said to you, with all this accountability bit, you may well need to do some work, inside getting your own house in order. The General Data Protection Regulation, is coming. There is simply no excuse for burying in your sand and thinking about it. That with Brexit, I don't need to bother about it. consumers are becoming much more savvy. They need trust and confidence that you're going to look after their data properly. If you're not looking after their data properly, they're not going to go to you and doing like that. I don't think we'll ever know just how much money TalkTalk lost from their data security breach from them there. But as well as the £400,000 fine, they've lost a huge brand reputation and damage to their goodwill, and consumers aren't going to trust them. The unsubscribe opt-out statement is fine for first and third party postal marketing at the moment. And as I said, for profiling, you do need to have the unsubscribe on them there. I can't stress to you the point about making sure that both statements are clear and transparent to your customer, not pre-ticked or as I said, or buried in or buried on page 64 of a 64-page privacy policy. There's lots of information both on the DMA and from the Information Commissioner's Office. Those of you who are members of the DMA, we've got a special microsite of them there that's exclusively to dealing with the General Data Protection Regulation. If you're not members of the DMA and are thinking about it doing so, then I'd strongly encourage you to do so. And I've put up my contact details there, and I'm going to be running some roundtables this afternoon for anybody who's got any more detailed questions on them there. So, as you say, that was just very much a sort of quick, brief canter through some of the key points, and hopefully we might explore some of them in a little bit more detail in the roundtable. Thank you very much.